this is Kyle, also known as Alientude, reviewing today this katana from Romance of Men. This is the Fukyo katana, and it retails for $200. I did not buy this katana. It was sent to me by Romance of Men for the purposes of this review. You know that up front, so if you think that makes me biased, at least you know. So $200 gets you a through-hardened spring steel katana with actually a good number of features here, which I will go over throughout this review. So let's start with the saya. This is a very blingy saya with a lot of glitter. I don't know if it's actual glitter, but it looks like glitter in it. And overall, it's very striking. It's not really my cup of tea, but some people may like it. It's got the sageo here tied into the presentation knot. This looks like it might be the same material as the ito. I am not positive on that though. It's pretty thin and tied pretty loosely. And the shibidome here are loose. I can feel them moving around right now with it still fully tied. The kojiri, kurigata, and koiguchi are not made of horn. They seem like simply made of wood, which is not really unexpected at this price point. The fit here is actually quite good. There's almost no rattle. There's a tiny bit in one dimension, but really pretty much no rattle. And it draws and sheathes very easily. I can just flick my thumb and it comes right out. If I pull it out, there's a little bit of rasp as it draws, and when sheathing it, it can actually get bind if it's not perfectly centered in there. But overall, it's a very good fit, especially at this price point. So looking at the Tsuka, the Koshirae, the hilt essentially, we're going to start by looking at some of those features that you wouldn't really expect to see on a $200 katana, and then get into the nitty-gritty. So this is real silk. That is very unusual at this price point. That's unusual at double or even triple this price point. The fact that they managed to get actual silk on here is really a nice feature. In addition, there is hishigami used in the wrapping, which does help make it. It's a more traditional method of wrapping, and if done properly, it really does help secure the ito in place and also make it shaped properly. Overall, it's a pretty attractive look. I think the green looks really good. There's a little bit of hourglass shaping to it, and the ito wrap itself is quite tight. It's not perfect, of course, but it's not easy to displace the knots much at all. They don't really travel around much, and it gives me a really solid grip, and the silk just feels nice as well. The overall look is pretty cohesive, and this is something that Romance of Men does quite well. They come up with a theme for a katana, and then they select all the parts and everything in service of that theme. So the Koshirae here is pretty simple. It's just got some lines carved into it, but also some dimension in all dimensions. It is tight. There's no looseness. It doesn't wiggle around. The ledge here from the ito to the Koshirae, it could be a little bit better. There's a bit of a ledge right here. It doesn't feel sharp, so I don't think it's going to create a hot spot, but it could be a little bit better. And then in addition, the knot here is just a little bit bulky. Not a lot, but at $200, not really a problem. The ito, like I mentioned, is tight. The green looks really good. The knots, or the diamonds, are actually pretty even. They're not perfect, of course, but they're pretty even and nice looking, and they don't really move around. The samaigawa underneath is real samaigawa. It's pretty much a pretty low quality panel because there's no differences in nodule size really. They're all pretty small nodules. You can see, if I displace the ito a little bit, I can see the hishigami, but it doesn't stick out obnoxiously or anything like that. Now, there is a very noticeable line where the samaigawa panel ends and it transitions into the wood, and that would be fixed if they inlaid the panels into the wood of the Tsuka core. Something I think Romance of Men could do, just because it makes the entire handle look better and also feel a little bit better. It's not a huge deal, especially at this price point, but it is an area that could be improved. The Manuki here are these pretty standard looking leaf Manuki, but they look pretty nice. I like the way they blend in with the rest of the components. There's a little bit of highlighting of what looks like brass, and most of it is dark. It looks overall pretty good. The Fuchi, while it is mostly done pretty well, it's too big. You can see it just doesn't flow right from the Tsuka to the Fuchi. Both sides, there's a big ledge on both sides here, and these are sharp enough that if it's conceivable they would bite my hand a little bit. But also because it is a little too big, it has come just a little bit loose. It's not a lot, but if every time I swing this sword, if my finger rides up against it, I feel that looseness, and it slightly degrades my confidence in the way the sword feels. It's not a huge problem because it's not crazy loose, but if they would pick a slightly smaller Fuchi for this, something that fit the size of the Tsuka, or if they had the Tsuka swell up a little bit to the Fuchi, I think that would work a lot better. And this is something that's common on Romance of Men swords, and honestly what I think is probably their biggest area that they could improve is really getting that fit right there to be just that little bit better. And I really do think the better solution would be to flare out the Tsuka just a little bit, because if you look here, the transition from the Saya into the Fuchi works. It's actually a nice flow, and then that flow is completely ruined by the Tsuka being a little bit too small for the Fuchi. So I don't think they should honestly pick smaller Fuchis. I think they should get the Tsuka core to flare out a little bit there in a nice smooth manner, of course. And it would make the overall look better, it would function better. And like I said, it's a little nuance that is not often seen on budget katana, but it is something that Romance of Men could do to make their swords more valuable and more presentable and just more appealing. Moving on to the Tsuba, we have this really nice looking geometric pattern. I've seen this on from other katana makers, but I think it really does work here, and it looks really nice. It's got that brass look on the outer rim and then darker on the inside. The casting is actually quite good. I don't really see any casting flaws anywhere in the Tsuba at all. And it is nice and tight. So I like that Tsuba quite a bit. The seppa on here are your normal Longchuan seppa. The Habaki has this, I don't know what this pattern it actually is, but it's something that draws more attention to it, and it just looks a little bit different than your normal Habaki. You can see where it is kind of getting a little scuffed from drawing and sheathing, but I can wipe a lot of that off just by wiping my finger on it, so it's not really a big deal. The fit of the Habaki is good. There's no wiggle. It could be fit to the blade a little bit better, but it's solid construction. Now moving on to the blade here, we have a double bohi. It would, I think normally you would call this a bohi and then the other one a sohi, but a sohi is generally a smaller fuller, and this is pretty much the exact same. So I think this would be more of a double bohi rather than a bohi and a sohi. It is a shinogi zukuri geometry, which means it's your pretty normal katana geometry just with that double fuller. There is a yokote here that is just kind of polished in. There's no geometric transition into the kasaki. It is through hardened, so there is not a hamon, although the polish is a little bit different near the edge. It doesn't have a fake hamon, but it does have a slightly different polish near the edge, presumably where they sharpened it. And if we feel along the spine, I can feel a little bit of rippling along it, especially if I feel the back of the spine. Actually, no, the back is not really rippling, but the sides of the spine do ripple a little bit, not a lot. And the surfaces of the blade, I don't really see any rippling in there except in the bohi and above the bohi. So there is a little bit of rippling there, but none of it is a big deal. These are all very minor ripples, and they don't affect the functionality of the sword at all. There's pretty much no niku here. It's not crazy thin to the edge, but I don't feel any like apple seeding of the geometry. It's pretty much a straight edge from the bottom of the second bohi to the edge. And overall, the polish is kind of a dull mirror or a very shiny satin. I can see my reflection in it a little bit, but it is definitely dulled. And one of the selling points of this katana is the sharpness. Romance of Men told me that when they sent this to me, it is their sharpest sword, but that it is also equivalent to the sharpness you could get in their custom katana maker if you choose the sharpest option. So, that is very, very sharp. That is the sharpest katana I have received personally. That's even sharper than the Tamashigiri katana that I reviewed a couple months ago, which was a very sharp sword. This is the next level of sharpness. It is very, very sharp. So as you can imagine from that sharpness I just demonstrated, cutting with this sword is a dream. It is so easy to do backyard cutting with this sword. I got so many clean cuts. I was able to do a zero distance cut. We're just putting the edge of the sword on the blade, on the target, and drawing it back. Sliced right through, no effort. It blew me away how excellent of a cutter this katana is on backyard targets. I have not yet done tatami on it. I'm going to try to do tatami shortly on it, and if I do get a chance to do that, I will add my thoughts on it here. But I fully expect with this geometry, with this edge, this would be an outstanding tatami cutter. I did manage to get some tatami cutting in, and I'm pretty much going to let the footage speak for itself. The one thing I do want to address is that this tatami mat is a little bit tougher than the other ones I normally cut, because when it was in the bag, it ended up getting some water crept in from some rain, soaked into it a little bit, and then kind of got some dirt and crud in it. So it's a little bit tougher than a normal tatami mat. And as you can see, the katana cut through it with very little effort. Handling wise, this katana is a joy to move around. It is balanced right around there. Nice good spot. A nice, what I would consider typical spot for a katana. It creates a good amount of sword wind. Not a crazy amount, but at the same time, I'm not swinging particularly hard here. So good amount of sword wind. So it's telling me when my edge alignment is good. It is relatively easy to move around at around 2 pounds, 10 ounces, right around there. It is relatively light for a katana, probably thanks to the double bohi there. And it is overall, based on it being pretty light, it's a sword that you can practice with and cut with and use for a while before it starts tiring you out. You know, if you have like a shinogi zukuri with no bohi, a bit more stout of a blade, it's certainly going to tire you out more. Now that might be something you want, you know, if you're trying to build stamina with a katana and, you know, get used to swinging it around a lot. A heavier one might help with that a little bit more. Now, I will say that because this sword is not particularly blade heavy or heavy in general, it doesn't do a ton of the work for you. And, you know, if you're cutting, you do need to put some speed into the cut, but the sharpness helps make up for that. So by not being particularly heavy or blade forward or tip heavy, anything like that, the sword does move well, but you do have to use some degree of effort to get it really moving, because it's not pulling, the sword's not pulling itself through the cuts. It's relying on you to provide the speed and the power, and it's doing its job by being very sharp, not by powering through cuts. So at $200, there's quite a bit to like on this katana. You get some features that are not common at all in this price range or even at double this price range, like the silk ito, the ishigami, a double bohi, a razor sharp edge. There's quite a bit to like here. There are flaws. You're going to have to accept compromises in any sword in the $200 range. The fuchi is a little bit big for the Tsuka core and hence has come slightly loose. The overall, the saya is not going to be particularly great for if you do iaido because there's no reinforcement in the koiguchi with like you normally would want a horn component there to help keep you from cutting through the saya if your technique is off. And of course it is through hardened, not differentially hardened, so there's no actual hamon, but that does make it better for a beginner cutter because a differentially hardened sword is not very good for a beginner who hasn't really got their edge alignment nailed in yet. If your edge alignment is off on a differentially hardened sword and you're hitting a harder target, even something that's not particularly hard but harder like tatami, you can easily take a bend, whereas a through hardened spring steel katana like this will bend and then spring back to true. So at $200, there are a lot of katana available to you. You can get a custom katana from most of the drop-down makers for that rough price range. You can get Ronin katana, there's Ryujin, there's all sorts of brands available at this $200 price point. What sets this one apart from those? Or is there anything that sets this katana apart from those? And the answer is absolutely yes. Again, those features I mentioned about the silk and the hishigami, and also just a very tight ito. The sharpness is something that I've rarely seen, pretty much never seen from any makers. This is very, very sharp. And that can be very important for people who, like me, suck at sharpening. So there is a lot to like here. Yes, I do think there's room for improvement. There's always room for improvement. Particularly, I think swelling up the Tsuka core a little bit to make the transition from the fuchi to the Tsuka a little bit better would make it better and would also probably alleviate the problem of the fuchi coming a little bit loose. This is a very minor detail. I could take this apart and shim the fuchi with a little bit of like cotton paper or something like that, and it would probably be resolved pretty quickly. But at $200, I think this is one of the best katana available that I have tested, especially if you want to do light target cutting. The sharpness on offer here is really outstanding, and it's rare to see this sharp of a sword from any maker on any blade at any price range. So if you want to just buy a katana and go out in the backyard and cut water bottles or cut fruit, light targets that don't require any kind of robustness to the katana, I think this would be an absolute steal at $200. Now, I didn't do any harder targets with this, so I don't know how well the edge would hold up to something to like, say, cutting into wood or heavy targets. So I can't say if it would be good for that or not. That's not really my thing. I like water bottles and I like cutting tatami. Those are the targets I cut, and I think this sword is an absolute steal at $200 if that's also what you want to cut. And that's going to wrap up this review. I want to say thank you to Romance of Men for sending it to me. And if you are interested in this one or any of the other swords they offer, I do have a link to their website in the description. Until next time, Alien 2 out.